Hi guys, hope you've had a good week so far. In the last video, I talked about the U.S. at war and how we were eventually able to land in France and, with the help of our allies, defeat Nazi Germany. Today, we're going to look at the other front in the war that we were facing, um, the Pacific Theater. So the Pacific Theater, guys, it was very difficult for the people that fought in it, not just because of the tough conditions that they're fighting under, as far as, you're on these faraway islands, oftentimes hot, oftentimes jungly, so you have a lot of insects and different things that you're dealing with, disease that you're dealing with. But also because, like we talked about in the last video, the heads of the general staff had decided Germany first. And so that meant that, that was going to be our first priority. But at the same time, we can't just give away territory. We can't keep retreating in the face of the Japanese, or we would be in a terrible position where we might be evacuating San Francisco and some of those areas on the West Coast. And so you have to have your forces in the Pacific at least holding a line at the very least. And so that was very difficult because a lot of the supplies and things like that were being used for Europe to defeat the Germans. And so that was very difficult for them. Um, and then also, guys, you have to take into account uh, Pearl Harbor. The Pearl Harbor attack was very successful. So we had no operational battleships in the Pacific. And so there's a huge discrepancy, there's a huge difference in forces when we start this war against the Japanese. And so that's kind of the situation. And really, guys, we need to understand Pacific warfare is a lot of landing on islands, taking islands, and it all centers around air power, okay, in the Pacific War. So you have air power coming from two different places. One is your flat tops, your aircraft carriers. So that's a power right there for air power. And the benefit from that is they're mobile. You can move them around on the seas, right? Um, the other air power is land-based air. So airfields on these islands. And so that's a big deal because you can use bigger bombers and things like that, bigger planes. They have a wider range um, to fly around, so that's a big deal. And also, an island is unsinkable. So you can damage an airfield, but it's unsinkable, right? So as long as you can go back in and repair it, that's the benefit from having land-based air. Okay, so those two things are going to be pivotal in the Pacific theater. Um, and so, fortunately for us, remember, guys, at Pearl Harbor, the carriers were out on maneuvers and they were not sunk by that surprise attack. So the most important kind of chess piece um, in the Pacific War was undamaged by the Pearl Harbor attacks. But we still are way undermanned with our naval power. And so, guys, the first major battle really that is going to turn the tide for our troops is the Battle of Midway. So this occurred in June 1942. So like I said, the Japanese, they're kind of at the peak of their powers. They're riding high. They've had victories all over the Pacific, especially in Southeast Asia. They've taken several of our territories, Wake Island, the Philippines, Guam, and so they're trending up, we're trending down. It's not going well. You did have the Doolittle raid that we conducted. We were able to make a bombing run at the heart of Tokyo. We did that with a lot of ingenuity. We launched bombers from an aircraft carrier, which that had never been done before. And then they had to kind of ditch. They didn't have enough fuel to get back though, because we were launching them at an extreme distance to make sure we didn't endanger our aircraft carriers, because if we lost those, we were going to be in trouble. But besides that, that was just more like a moral victory. It did hardly anything. It was like a pinprick to the Japanese war effort. But um, besides the moral victory there, we were really in trouble. We were really reeling. And so Midway is going to be very important for us. So the U.S. was able to crack the Japanese codes. So they have these, everything they send out, guys, during the war obviously is coded, so the enemy doesn't know what's going on. And so we cracked their codes, and it was highly believed that they're going to carry out an attack around this time on Midway Atoll, which that just means you have a group of islands. Um, and so this is a big deal, guys. This battle is a big deal, not only to turn things around, but strategically, meaning this is in our own backyard, so to speak. This is very close to Hawaii, the Hawaiian Islands. It's about 1,000 miles away. So technically within bomber distance um, of the bomber capabilities at the time. And so that might make it, make Hawaii an untenable situation if they're able to take Midway. So we cannot let them take Midway. Admiral Nimitz, he's the supreme Pacific leader. Okay, they call him subcompact, so Supreme Pacific Commander, and he decides to lay an ambush for the Japanese. So we set up our forces just away from on the other side of Midway, where they're going to be attacking Midway. The forces are heavily in the Japanese favor. So we're only coming in with 3 aircraft carriers, one of which an amazing job, guys, by our service people and civilians. So Battle of Coral Sea, the Yorktown, one of our aircraft carriers, was heavily damaged, limped back to Pearl Harbor, and our workmen patched it up and put it back into service in 3 days. They worked around the clock to put it back into service for this battle at Midway. So that way we're coming in with 3 aircraft carriers as opposed to 2, which is a big difference in strength of force. So we have 3 carriers, 7 cruisers, and 15 destroyers in this battle. Like I said, no battleships. Whereas Japan has 6 aircraft carriers, 7 battleships, the most powerful warships as far as guns and things like that and armor on the seas. They have 15 cruisers, which is kind of between a destroyer and a battleship, and 42 destroyers. Okay, so this is a huge flotilla coming out after Midway. So this is a big lopsided position for them. But the United States is going to win. Okay, so in this battle, guys, it was very fortunate for the U.S., I guess. So aircraft carrier tactics, typically you send out scout planes looking for the enemy. They report the enemy's position. You sortie is what they call it. So you have your planes take off, and basically the idea is you put your fighter escorts up there. You put your so you had your bombers, and then you also had your torpedo planes. And basically the tactics were the escorts come in with the bombers and with the torpedo planes to help protect them from enemy planes, and then the bombers make their run first because the torpedo planes, they're really slow. They have to take a low, slow trek. They can't really move, so they can get their torpedo off at the right angle and position and all that. So it's a lot harder for them. So the idea was the bombers come in, the enemy fighters come attack the bombers, and then in come the torpedo planes to deliver the knockout punch with the torpedoes. Our servicemen didn't do a great job sorting. They didn't do a great job forming up and doing that. And so all these, our three carriers were launching their planes at different times. They're having trouble making a coordinated attack, but it actually proved to be to our benefit. So basically, guys, the Japanese um, fighter planes, they were busy taking out the torpedo planes, and so they were all hovering around the waterline, and then in came our bombers, and they had a free run, and they're able to sink four carriers. We also shot down 320 Japanese planes, or destroyed 320 Japanese planes. The U.S. had casualties. They lost one carrier and about 150 planes. And so this is a big, big victory for the United States. It turns the tide for us now. From here on out, guys, the United States is on the offensive. We're no longer on the defensive, trying to kind of stop this momentum. We're on the offensive. So speaking of offensive, our U.S. offensive in the Pacific, guys, there's really two competing strategies. The Navy put forth a strategy of what we call the island hopping strategy, island hopping plan, where we don't need to go through and conquer all these different islands. We just need to conquer the strategic important ones, and we'll basically let those Japanese defenders that we don't need on those islands, we'll let them just sit there and twiddle their thumbs and burn up supplies, waiting for an attack, because we don't. It's not a strategic need to take those islands on our way to Japan. Um, so that was, and this is kind of through the Central Pacific, moving through the Central Pacific. That was the Navy's plan for defeating Japan. The U.S. Army, headed by General MacArthur, who he was in charge of the Philippines when it was taken. So he definitely wants revenge. He wants to take back the Philippines. He had promised the people of the Philippines before he escaped the island from the Japanese. He promised he would return and take back the Philippines. So of course he wants to do that. That's his plan. Is that they're going to move kind of through southern Pacific, take the island of Rubal, and eventually the Philippines on the way to Japan. Okay, so those are the two competing strategies, and we're going to kind of get a mix of both because the Army and Navy, they operate differently under different leadership, so we don't have to do the same thing. But the Navy guys, they're going to come up with this attack. So we want to secure Australia against the Japanese. That was a key thing for us, was to maintain communication lines and supply lines with Australia, because Australia is way closer to Japan than anything we have. And so that was key for us. The Japanese, they're building, we get intel, they're building a air base, an airfield on Guadalcanal, and that threatens Australia. So they would be in range to bomb Australia from Guadalcanal. And so Admiral King, so he was the overall commander of the U.S. naval forces, he ordered U.S. forces to take the airfield. And so this was kind of done on a whim, so supplies were short. They actually even dubbed the Operation Shoestring, because they were doing it, on a short budget, shoestring budget. And this was a really, really difficult battle for our naval forces and for our troops. So on land, we were able to land on Guadalcanal, and take the airfield. But the Japanese brought in reinforcements by night, and they severely punished our troops for that airfield. So they were continually trying to take the airfield back from us. They conducted these banzai attacks where you would just have all these Japanese soldiers charge across the open field, and they're just coming at them wave after wave after wave, and the machine guns are trying to just keep up with mowing them down before they break our lines. And so much so, guys, that they were melting the machine gun barrels because it was getting so hot from firing so quickly, so often. and so it was a really